number 65 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Today we meet for 2 hours to continue our study of the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Please allow me to welcome the witnesses joining us today. We have Matthew Herder, the Director, Health Law Institute at Dalhousie University, and Douglas Clark, Executive Director, Patented Medicine Prices Review Board. Thank you both for taking the time to be with us today. You're probably aware that the convention that we use at this committee is that the person posing the question to you has the right to interrupt you once the length of your question exceeds, the length of your answer exceeds the length of their question. So that may or may not come into play today, but just so that you know, if you get a 2-minute question, you have 2 minutes to answer it. If you get less than that, then and you go past it, it's the member's prerogative. Sometimes they'll let you go, and sometimes they won't, and I won't intervene unless you're being treated unfairly in regards to that convention. So with that, we're going to begin with opening statements, starting with Mr. Herder. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for the invitation to appear today. I'd like to use my opening statement to pose some questions that I hope will inform the committee's inquiry. The first question is about the PMPRB's independence. When he appeared before this committee last week, Minister Duclos claimed that his decision to not consult with the board prior to November 28, 2022 was driven by a desire to, quote, protect the independence of the board. According to his testimony, when he finally wrote the acting chair of the board on November 28th, he was simply exercising his duty to consult with the board under Section 96 sub 5 of the Patent Act. But why wait until the 11th hour to consult with the board? The minister has not been briefed by the PMPRB about its reforms on any occasion during his tenure. And in what way does his request that we suspend our consultations, a step no previous Minister of Health has taken, help to protect the board's independence? Under Section 96 of the Act, it is the board that has the legal authority to make guidelines. During the fall consultation period, industry publicly called for the board to suspend its consultations without naming what its concerns actually were. Instead, industry went to the minister to ask him to repeat its request that the board suspend. And the minister did exactly that without ever meeting with the board to gain an understanding of the proposed guidelines. In this environment, how can the PMPRB credibly consult on guidelines in the future? The answer is that it can't. Industry now knows that it can bypass the PMPRB when it isn't satisfied with the board's policy direction and get the minister to do its bidding. It is an arrow straight to the heart of the board's supposed independence. My second set of questions is about influence, specifically industry's pervasive influence on pharmaceutical policy in Canada. Look no further than the PMPRB itself. Several former officials have turned their time at the regulator into consulting careers despite the fact that they are prohibited under the Conflict of Interest Act from acting in a manner that takes improper advantage of their time in office. One former executive director of the PMPRB moved to a VP position at Innovative Medicines Canada, only to return to Health Canada a few years later. She is today the head of Health Canada's Office of Pharmaceutical Management Strategies, the lead official advising the Assistant Deputy Minister, the Deputy Minister, and the Minister on all PMPRB-related matters. There appear to be direct lines of communication between health and industry. Days before any public announcement had been made about our resignations, pharmaceutical lobbying firms knew that we were stepping down from the board. The newly appointed chair of the PMPRB is a practicing lawyer with clients actively engaged in the development of patented medicines. How is the new board chair appointed given these potential conflicts of interest? How did lobbyists know that the executive director and myself were stepping down? Did someone at Health Canada advise the minister not to meet with the PMPRB last fall? My point is that the line between consultation and conflicts of interest has become completely blurred under industry's influence. Unless we start taking conflicts of interest far more seriously, meaningful pricing reform will be impossible. Finally, I want to raise a fundamental question about political courage in the face of industry's power. You have heard different accounts of what happened at the PMPRB. It's important that the truth comes to light. but it should not distract us from the larger issue. I urge the members of this committee, Parliament, and Canadians more broadly to remain focused on industry's power to control the policy conversation. They control it by playing fast and loose with the facts. They say pricing reforms will hurt research and development, but the evidence shows that the pharmaceutical industry spending on R&D is already at an all-time low in the absence of pricing reforms. Industry says that pricing reforms will stop life-saving therapies from being launched in Canada, but the evidence suggests that almost all new drugs that are launched in the U.S. also make it to Canada. Trikafta, the cystic fibrosis drug that its manufacturer threatened not to launch in Canada as a result of the PMPRB's pricing reforms, was actually exempt from our new pricing regime. Yet industry continues to claim that the PMPRB was to blame for Trikafta's delayed availability in Canada. Industry plays fast and loose with the facts because patients are desperate for new therapies, and because they pay the leaders of patient advocacy organizations to sell the line that the PMPRB is the problem. Industry plays fast and loose with the facts because they can and because we let them. The question we should all be asking is, when will we ever stand up to industry's power and take the steps that are needed to make medicines more affordable for Canadians? Thank you. I welcome your questions.
Mr. Herter, we were advised that you might need longer than 5 minutes. You kept it under 5 minutes, and it was concise and well done. Mr. Clark, over to you for the next 5 minutes.
I suspect I won't follow Professor Herter's example in that regard. I may need a little bit more time. Bonjour et merci de m'avoir invité à témoigner.
Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. As some of you know, I have been the Executive Director of the PMPRB since 2013, including during the latest consultation on new guidelines that took place last fall. However, I'm currently on leave from the PMPRB and will be formally stepping down as Executive Director on June the 1st. Any facts I cite in my opening remarks or in my ensuing answers to your questions can be corroborated either by the relevant documentary record, which I understand the committee is seeking to obtain, and or by remaining members of the board who were involved in last fall's consultation. The management team at the PMBRB and, of course, Professor Herter, who is with me today. I will try my best to limit my remarks to those facts and to keep any expressions of opinion to a minimum. I want to first address the confusion from last week's testimony around the protocol for briefing the minister and who dialogues with whom, as between the PMPRB and Health Canada. Before doing so, I should point out that the PMPRB chairperson position is a part-time appointment and has always been occupied by persons residing outside the National Capital Region who juggle multiple other professional responsibilities. As such, in order for the PMPRB to operate effectively day to day, the Executive Director is often called upon to exercise functions that, based on a pedantic interpretation of the PMPRB's organization chart and reporting structure, would nominally fall to the chairperson. Accordingly, with the exception of the current minister, I have personally briefed every Minister of Health on guidelines reform as far back as Minister Ambrose under the previous government, either on behalf of the chairperson or with the chairperson. Some of these ministers I have briefed on the topic multiple times. To the best of my recollection, every such briefing was initiated and arranged by the Deputy Minister's Office, often at the behest of the Minister's Office. In addition, as Mr. Belair indicated in his testimony last Thursday, it is routine for meetings to take place at the working level between PMPRB staff and Health Canada officials. Insofar as last fall's guidelines consultation is concerned, PMPRB policy staff met with and briefed their Health Canada counterparts a total of 7 times between early October and late November. At no time over the course of those consultations did Health Canada officials express concern about the proposed guidelines. On the contrary, the feedback we got from them was consistently supportive, and they indicated that our policy approach was sound.
Proposed last fall is a departure from the status quo. Their content was informed by recent developments in our operating environment and based on the best advice of our policy and legal experts. It was also endorsed by our board, the members of which are appointed based on career-long knowledge and expertise in subject areas relevant to our mandate. Although the initial reaction from stakeholders was muted, it did not take long for anti-PMPRB rhetoric from industry to ramp up along recent lines. On November 10th, IMC issued a news release calling on Health Canada to direct the PMPRB to suspend its consultations, failing which, and I quote, Canadian patients will be deprived of potentially life-saving new medicines. On November 22nd, IMC issued another news release claiming that the PMPRB was, quote, misleading Canadians because the findings in our latest annual report about domestic R&D did not agree with the report IMC commissioned from StatsCan. This is the same annual report the PMPRB has published every year for the past 35 years and which is bound by a legislative definition of R&D set by Parliament and the Minister of Health. Despite assurances from Health Canada officials about the proposed guidelines, the acting chairperson became increasingly concerned that no briefing with the minister had been scheduled, and industry reaction to them had me sharing that concern. She directed me and one of my senior staff to seek out such a briefing. She also instructed me to push back on industry claims in my meeting with them. I'm almost done. As a result, I personally made multiple overtures to the minister's chief of staff and senior policy advisor via texts, emails, and phone calls. The chief of staff told me to get back to me on my offer of a briefing, which he never did, and the senior policy advisor refused to take or return my calls. Again, in my 10 years as executive director under all previous ministers, I would routinely speak or meet with members of her staff to discuss matters of overlapping concern, as authorized by the chairperson, and most such meetings were initiated by staff, not me. On November 22nd, I and several other senior PMPRB staff met in person with IMC and approximately 20 industry representatives to discuss the proposed guidelines. At the end of that meeting, I urged those present to cease calling for suspension of the consultations. I explained to them that under the Act, the board was the master of its consultations on changes to its guidelines and that it was highly inappropriate for them to be calling for such an intervention on the part of Health Canada or any other third party. A colleague and I met virtually with the acting chair later that same day, and she was pleased to learn of my having passed that message along on behalf of the board. Nevertheless, as you know, on November 28th, the minister wrote to the acting chairperson to request precisely what the industry had called for in its November 10 news release. To say that I was surprised by that letter would be an understatement, and its content was of grave concern to me, my senior staff, and our general counsel. As you know, the acting chairperson responded to the minister in a letter dated November 30th, in which she expressed her own surprise at learning of the minister's concerns. She also drew her attention to the fact that consulting on changes to the guidelines is a legislative function that goes to the heart of the board's expertise and independence. In closing, I would like to try to put these recent events in their broader context. The PMPRB is a micro-agency of less than 80 people that regulates a market of about 1,300 products, accounting for about $20 billion in annual sales in Canada. It has no legal obligation to issue guidelines, only consult if it does so, and any guidelines it chooses to issue are not binding on anyone. They have no force of law. The only binding authority the board has in relation to pricing is to make a determination following a public hearing that a patented medicine has been priced excessively. Merci, il me ferait plaisir de...
Thank you. I will be very pleased to answer your questions.
Right to questions, beginning with the Conservatives. Dr. Kitchen, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for your presentations and being here today. It's greatly appreciated. It's a chance for us to discuss this issue. Mr. Herder, your first question that you asked us was basically, I might as well drop the mic and said, okay, I want to ask you that question. I'm just wondering if you can expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So I was trying to ask questions about the independence, and as my former colleague Doug Clark just mentioned, under the Act, we have the capacity to complete guidelines. We have to consult, yes, but we make the final decision. That was one of my jobs as a board member. If it becomes possible for industry to ask and put pressure through other channels, through Health Canada, through the Minister's office, that effectively stops that consultation or asks us to do so, it signals to the world that we may not be able to finish guidelines on our own. Even though we're empowered by law, the politics of that complicated. And so it makes it very hard, not just for guidelines, for any kind of decision-making we want to do when it's been communicated that there is this end around that is now possible for us to sort of arrive at final decisions on our own.
Thank you. And So now, my understanding, you've been with the PMPR 5 years, roughly. You were about 5 years, correct?
I was appointed in June 2018.
Okay. To your knowledge, has the federal health minister ever refused briefing or ignored your office's request for a meeting?
To my knowledge, no.
Would you consider that unusual? Mr. Clark, if you think you can answer to that too, please, by all means.
Yes, I would consider that unusual. As I said in my opening remarks, I've met on multiple occasions with all previous ministers to brief them on guidelines reform. Some ministers 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I made multiple attempts to obtain a briefing with the minister or his office and received basically no response to those efforts. And as you may recall from Thursday's testimony in her letter in response to the minister, her letter dated November 30th, the acting chair once again made a formal request for a meeting with the minister to talk about their 2 letters, and nothing came of that.
Thank you. So you sort of indicated a number of times, Mr. Clark, and I guess to both of you, what sort of methods did your offices use to attempt to initiate that dialogue with the minister?
We don't initiate it. Usually it comes to us via the Deputy Minister's office, often at the request of the Minister's office. In this instance, since no such attempts were forthcoming, I reached out myself through text to the Chief of Staff, emails to the Chief of Staff, calls to the Senior Policy Director in the Minister's office. And I also have a colleague, a senior management colleague, who made her own efforts to reach out through, I believe, the Deputy Minister's office to arrange such a meeting. But again, nothing came of those efforts.
And a lot of this interaction was not only in that direction, was it also within the PMPRB staff as well?
I'm sorry, I don't understand you.
I guess my question is, you indicated that you were texting and along those lines. I'm not a techie, so I don't know the systems that people use, but I'm just wondering, was that going back and forth with interactions between you and staff, or between you and the board and with the minister?
Well, certainly my staff and the board was aware of the efforts we were making to arrange a meeting, if that's what you mean. But in terms of like the channels that we use to seek out a meeting, as I said, text, email, phone calls, et cetera. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I apologize.
So I guess would there have been other methods? So would there have been personal emails that might have been used, or personal texts that would have been used in those lines?
Well, I mean, one could argue that texting is more of a personal channel of communication, and I did use that at one point with the Chief of Staff. But like I said, I didn't get a response to it. I followed up by email, and I did get a response and made an offer of a briefing, and was told that, they'd get back to me, which they never did. And I have copies of those texts and emails.
Thank you. As you're more likely aware, your former colleague, Ms. Bourassa-Forcier, has a very different view of the situation to that set out in your letter of resignation, Mr. Herter. In your opinion, was the consultation period adequate?
I think it was an adequate time frame. We had been in a process of reform for several years to hear views. But I'd like to stress that we wanted to actually meet in Ottawa, as the remaining board members actually did in mid-December, to discuss all of the feedback. There was no decision at the time of her resignation about what would happen next, whether we would move forward with those guidelines, whether we would go through another consultation. All of that was on the table. So I think the time frame was adequate.
10 seconds? Okay, no, good. I will defer my 10 seconds. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kitchen. Next, Mr. Vancouverden, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the witnesses. Thank you for being here. Last week, our witness, Madame Bourassa-Forcier, was cut a little bit short, so I'd like to read into the record something from her letter, which I think is relevant to this meeting today, regarding the new chair, Thomas Digby. I quote, I have not met the new president, who has expertise in intellectual property and has previously worked in the pharmaceutical industry. I see this experience not as a problem, but as an asset. It's important to know that the industry and its strategies well to identify the elements that will motivate change in practices. I am also confident that this new chairperson will know how to create the change required within the PMPRB so that this agency can fulfill its mandate in the best possible way for all Canadians. I end quote. Mr. Herder, Professor Herder, before I ask a question, I'd like to take umbrage with the allegation that members of the government didn't take the opportunity to challenge, particularly in the case of Trikafta, suggestions from industry that the PMPRB was standing in the way of access to that drug. I have a young man in my riding named Liam Wilson, who's an extraordinary young guy. I talked to him almost every week throughout that process and ensured that his family was aware of the fact that they had not yet applied for the regulatory approval, which the pharmaceutical industry was alleging that the PMPRB was the stopgap. So on to my questions. For Mr. Herder, the Court of Appeal of Quebec found that the amendment in question that would allow the PMPRB to collect price information, that it's of a third-party rebates and the new price regulatory factors, including their associated reporting requirements, to be outside the patent power and therefore invalid. That was the Court of Appeal of Quebec. This was corroborated by the Superior Court of Quebec and also the Court of Appeal of Quebec, the Federal Court, and the Federal Court of Appeal. Do you think that the Court of Appeal was wrong?
So I'm not sure that summary that you just provided is accurate. I don't think the Federal Court of Appeal corroborated that finding. The issues were different in the two cases. However, I think the real problem is that there was an opportunity to seek further guidance from the Supreme Court of Canada, and the decision was made not to seek leave to appeal.
Okay, I'll clarify. They were declared out of scope or unconstitutional, not only by the Superior Court of Quebec, but also the Court of Appeal of Quebec, the Federal Court, and the Federal Court of Appeal. But to move on, last week Melanie Bourassa-Forcier shared with us, speaking as a lawyer, that she has doubts of the constitutionality of those reforms before the court decision, so she wasn't surprised by the Court of Appeal's decision. And I take it by your answer that you disagree with that view. Did you ever speak with Madame Bourassa-Forcier as acting chair of the board about her views on this matter, and do you have a legal rationale for disagreeing with her?
I was surprised by her comment last week that she was skeptical about the constitutionality of the provisions. I was surprised because I was not clear about why you would accept the role as a member of the board if you had questions along those lines. I think there is real debate about the constitutionality of some of those amendments, and to have a better understanding of what the real prices being paid in Canada for those drugs, I think the changes to the regulations which were proposed were warranted, and then when the Quebec Court of Appeal decision happened, we have to live with that, especially in the absence of an attempt to appeal to the Supreme Court. So I think that there is ample grounds under the federal patent-related power to seek more information about the real prices of drugs, but obviously the Quebec Court of Appeal decision is binding upon us. Our new guidelines tried to take that into account and continue to move forward.
Thank you, Professor Herder. So I'd also like to point out that Mr. Clark, as an official that reported to Melanie Bourassa-Forcier, she said that there was no invitation to meet the minister. She said that there was little or any attempt to comment. So, you know, are these accounts of the situation and how diligent people were in trying to contact the minister seem to be very, very different. And at the same time, Melanie Bourassa-Forcier last week, who again was the acting chair of the PMPRB, told the committee that she did not feel that there was any interference from the minister stemming from a letter, although, you know, you've shared very different views today. So how do we rationalize this very diametric difference in opinion?
Well, to your first point, I'm very surprised to hear her say that no efforts were made to contact the minister, because I made multiple efforts and I kept her apprised of those efforts, and I have a documentary record that corroborates the fact that I did make those efforts. I I think it's, intelligent people can disagree on substantive matters of law and policy, and that's just the way things are. I was not in agreement with Madame Bourassa-Forcier at the time, and obviously Professor Herder wasn't either, and I think, it was that lack of agreement that ultimately led the acting chairperson to step down, which is her right under the circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Now, just moving on, if I have time, Mr. Chair.
You have about 10 seconds. You have time to offer a closing comment, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Van Coverden. Ensuite, Monsieur Thériault pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Thériault, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clark, did you retain any information, keep any information from the chair? Are you getting the interpretation? Did you keep back any information from the chair, or did you and the chair keep back any information? I'm sorry. There is simultaneous interpretation. Could you please stop the timer, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. Did you and the chair keep back any information? According to the rules, you said that, but then you reject it out of hand. Is the top leader and is responsible for how the board behaves, for the management of its internal affairs. So why did she tell us that there was resistance? Your executive secretary is the same as the chair's. Why was there resistance to her desire to ask for a meeting with the minister? You mean from the minister's office? No, from your office, from the executive secretary that you share. Why was there resistance there? There was no resistance. I said a number of times that I made multiple efforts. So why did she resign? That is a question you need to put to her. Well, I'm putting it to you. If everything was fine, Mr. Clark, why did she retire? I think the reason for which Ms. Bourassa-Forcier resigned is that other members of the board did not agree with her desire to accede to the minister's request. So what you're saying is that she wanted to ensure that all stakeholders would be heard. You still had time to hear everyone with the current process. All members were against that. Did you have a meeting on this, Mr. Clark? A number of meetings. She wanted to suspend consultation. Mr. Herder, in your resignation letter, you say that the pharmaceutical industry is hostile. And that sort of media articles in the media of this kind emerged at the same time as your resignation. So as a member, you were not neutral and impartial about some stakeholders. And yet in the guidelines on the conduct of members that I believe you signed, it states that members of the board are subject to impartiality standards, rigorous impartiality standards, because of the quasi-judicial nature of the hearings, and that the responsibility of someone appointed is to be neutral. So why did you remain in position after the verdict of the Court of Appeal and the government's decision not to challenge it, when your letter shows that you were no longer impartial and therefore no longer able to act as a commissioner during hearings? Why did you resign only in February?
Thank you for the question. So the first point to make is that administrative tribunals are composed, and in this case, of folks who have expertise relevant to the work of that tribunal. They are not held to the same standard as a matter of law in terms of a court or a judge. The level of impartiality is not supposed to be the same. They're invited or appointed in those roles because of their expertise, and we bring that to our work. I did not have decided views in any way about whether a particular price of a particular medication was too high. That is the work in which I need to maintain a high level of impartiality in the context of a hearing. In making decisions, policy decisions, the other role that board members play about what should the guidelines look like, how should we consult, and so forth, I'm allowed to have particular views about what that process entails, how much communications and meetings with stakeholders ought to have, and when taking into account all of our stakeholders, not just industry. We're losing patients in the equation here. What should be the best decision about how to move forward. So respectfully, I disagree that I lacked the level of impartiality required for that work.
The guidelines state that you need to be perceived to be impartial and not to make political statements. You criticize the minister for respectfully asking the board to consider suspending the consultation process, implying that this constituted interference. And yet, during his last appearance in 2020, Mr. Clark has stated that it would be suitable for the federal government. This is in response to a question whether it would be good for the government to postpone implementation. Mr. Clark responded that it wasn't up to him to say whether amendments to the regulations were coming at the right time, because this came under or within the purview of the Minister of Health. Do you agree with Mr. Clark's position?
Regulations is vested in the Governor and Council, Federal Cabinet, on the recommendation of the Minister of Health. Mr. Clark was simply explaining that the board itself cannot pass regulations. In contrast, under the legislation, we have the power to finalize guidelines. Regulations and guidelines are two different things.
But if in 2017-18, because you refer to the fact that this was 5 years ago, before the decision by the court, if you had gone ahead, there were stakeholders who could have considered that there was a problem. So the fact that all stakeholders were consulted meant that there was no encroachment and reforms would be appropriate.
We're going to give you a chance to answer it, but you also need to have a chance to understand it. Is
the interpretation now working? This is the French. This is the English channel. This is the English channel. And this is the English channel. Mr. Thériault, are you satisfied with the response you have had from Mr. Clark? It's working now. Yes, please do put your question again. And Mr. Herder will have an opportunity to answer. After that, we'll go to Mr. Davies. I'll change my question. Last week, in a comment, a question to the minister, Mr. Davies said that you
said he was out of time, and he put his last question. You said you were just going to give the witness time to answer the question that was put. Yeah. Now Mr. Thériault is putting a different question after he has time. Yeah. That's not appropriate.
Yeah.
Would you kindly ask the same question, the question that was missed because of technical problems? I was saying that in your letter, hold on, let me find this again. Do you really have the impression that the minister attempted to interfere in the consultation process, even though Section 102 of the Patents Act does give the minister the right to intervene? I have made my question more concise.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. So The letter was a request as it was worded, but it happened in the context where no such request had ever been made, to my knowledge, by a former Minister of Health or the present one. In addition, it was happening in a context where, as you've heard from my colleague, there were multiple attempts to reach his office, and the answer back was silence. So that's why it came across as more of a demand than a request, and it was incredibly divisive inside the board. So it absolutely interfered with our work, in my view.
Thank you.
Mais c'était sa prérogative.
But it was his prerogative.
Thank you. Let me get some context, some short questions. This government has identified reforms to PMPRB starting in 2017. Is that correct?
Yes, 2017, the PMPRB started consulting on reforms to its guidelines in 2016, and then the government sort of picked up that process and elevated it to changes to the regulations.
And my understanding is that there were 3 major policy reforms that were identified since that time. Is that correct?
3 major policy reforms. Oh,
Change of
gosh.
comparator countries.
Yes.
The disclosure of
Yes.
confidential price rebates by pharmaceutical companies, and changes to the ability to amend the act to take into account pharmacoeconomic and market size.
That's correct.
So those are the 3.
Yeah.
How many of those 3 proposed changes to the Patent Act for PMPRB reform are in place today?
Just the change to the countries, the schedule of countries.
Okay, now, my understanding is that's not actually in place, that the minister pointed to June 22 passing of PMPRB amended drug regulations.
Yes.
But it's my understanding that those regulations cannot take effect until the guidelines are passed by the PMPRB. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So is it correct that not one of those 3 reforms identified since 2017 to lower the price of prescription medication in Canada are in force today in Canada in 2023?
Well, from a technical legal standpoint, they're enforced, but they're not being applied by the PMPRB in its day-to-day work. And now the board will be down to 2 members as of June of this year. And, I think the government's
Okay.
hopeful that it will have a newly constituted board, but it will be a while before these regulations are being actively applied by the PMPRB.
I'm just trying to find out, do the guidelines have to be passed before those regulations can be applied by the PMPRB?
Outside of a hearing context, yes, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I'm trying to find out, we had so many contradictions last week, I can't keep this straight. The minister wrote the board on November 28, 2022, and said that he asked the board to suspend consultations, and he said publicly because he had not yet been consulted. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
And Section 95 of the Patent Act says, before the board issues any guidelines, it shall consult with the minister. Is that correct?
It is correct.
How many
Yes.
times did you, Mr. Clark, to your knowledge, did the PMPRB board, reach out to the minister's office in order to brief him or consult with him about the guidelines?
Well, just to back up for a second, typically we brief at the officials level, and we had 7 of those briefings. But we also, in the past, have always had at least 1 briefing with the minister. And I would say, well, the record will reflect I made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attempts to reach out to the minister's office to obtain a briefing with the minister.
Who's the chief of staff that you sent the request?
Jamie Kippens.
Thank you. So the minister wants to be consulted. He says the guidelines can't go forward until he's consulted, but you're reaching out to consult them, and you're meeting with silence. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Now, for her part, Madame Bourassa Forcier told this committee that she felt it was inappropriate to reach out to the minister for a meeting. Did you hear that testimony?
If I did, I don't recall that part of it. I
Mr.
would have
Herter,
understood
did you remember that testimony?
I don't recall that specific statement.
No, she says in her letter elucidating on her resignation that PMPRB staff failed to follow up on my request to meet with the Minister of Health despite my insistence. Is that correct?
I think what she means is we failed to obtain a meeting for her.
So to your knowledge, did she attempt to get a meeting with the minister to discuss these guidelines?
Well, she directed me and one of my staff on multiple occasions to do that. We sought to operationalize that, and she also, in her letter of reply to the minister, asked for a meeting.
Mm-hmm. So now in the minister's letter of November 28th, he requested the PMPRB to suspend the consultations, not extend them. What's the difference between these two, and why would he suspend the consultations instead of extending them if he wanted to get time to be consulted?
That is a question that baffles me to this day. I mean, if you're making the argument, first of all, the minister, we have a duty to consult the minister on our guidelines, not on our consultation process. But if your concern is that stakeholders haven't had enough time to properly understand, the mechanisms that are being consulted on, one would think that you would, it would be out of order to make any kind of a request in relation to the process, but you would think if you were going to ask for anything, it would be for an extension. And Professor Herder already spoke about this. I think it was more likely than not at the end of the day, once the board had gotten all the feedback from stakeholders, given the tenor of the feedback from industry, that we would have extended or even actually
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
go forward a second round of
Mr.
consultation.
Van
Spend the
Coverden,
time,
please.
please.
Mr. Van Coverden, on a point of order.
I'd like to point out a misquote. I believe that Mr. Davies is unintentionally misquoting the minister with respect to the board consider pausing the consultation process so as to allow time to work collaboratively with all stakeholders to understand fully the short and long-term impacts of the proposed guidelines. It's being taken well out of context in the line of questioning.
Something that you will have the opportunity to clarify when you have the floor. Mr. Davies, you still have a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, during the 60-day consultation period, the minister and his staff met with the pharmaceutical industry 15 times, just in that consultation period alone. And the PMPRB, who is apparently legally obligated to consult by the Patent Act, 0 times. What is your reaction to that?
Well, I think as everybody here knows, the government is quite intent on attracting investment in domestic manufacturing capacity in the event of a future pandemic. And I think it's also pretty clear that the PMPRB reforms are the fly in the ointment in those efforts. And I think the imperative of smoothing out relations with the industry trumped any consideration of whether the guidelines were sound policy or had merit.
Mr. Herder, do you have a take on that?
Only to echo the same. It was a choice. It in some ways suggests to me that perhaps the minister was more informed about what industry's concerns actually were than we were, because we were told by industry that they wanted us to suspend, but outlining in detail what their concerns with the proposed guidelines actually were didn't happen until the very end of the consultation process.
Thank you, Mr. Davies and Mr. Herder. Next, Mr. Genereux, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for being here today. This isn't really a good look for the PMPRB in general. I imagine both of you probably joined the PMPRB, you, Mr. Clark, through the executive director role, and you, Mr. Herder, through the board role, in a way to make drug pricing let's say better in this country. It's obviously spiraled to this point where you're here testifying before a health committee, as some of your colleagues or former colleagues have. Where, in your opinion, Mr. Clark, you've been there for quite a while on the PMPRB. Where did this all kind of start going down this path? Where did this begin that leads you here today?
That's a really good question. Look, the government adopted a regulatory policy that its own analysts said was going to result in $10 billion less revenue for the industry. And then they turned it over to us to operationalize that policy, but I think with an expectation that we were all going to have a good time and get along. And that's just not possible. I mean, the PMPRB is the David to the Goliath of a transnational trillion-dollar industry. Our annual budget is a fraction of what many multinational pharmaceutical CEOs make in executive compensation. If the expectation is that we are required to operationalize a policy that will remove $10 billion or $3 billion out of industry coffers in a way that has the blessing of that industry, it's a recipe for futility.
Would you agree, Mr. Herder?
Yes.
So I guess going back to some of the earlier questioning about what did or what didn't happen with the minister getting an invite or not an invite to meet with the PMPRB. To summarize, the executive director of the PMPRB reached out, your account 5 attempts to meet with the minister. The minister was careful in his wording last week where he said, I never received an invitation from the chair of the board. In the past, you've said you've met with ministers, Minister Haidu, Petitpot Taylor, Ambrose. Was it the same approach taken by you, Mr. Clark, to get there? And I'll put a second question on that. When you didn't get a positive response to meet with the minister, did you perhaps reach out to the parliamentary secretary of health to provide a briefing instead?
Look, the process has always varied in the past depending on the circumstances. Sometimes I would reach out to the chief of staff or the senior policy advisor and say this issue's on the radar and we should probably discuss. I would say more often than not it was reversed. I would get a call from the minister's office wanting to discuss something, and then we'd have to make a decision as to whether this warranted elevating it to the minister and briefing the minister on something. But typically, more formally, when ministerial briefings were arranged that I attended and briefed the minister on, that request came from the minister's office via the deputy minister's office and over to our group under the Act, under Section 1 of the 2 of the Patent Act. And I think Mr. Davies raised this on Thursday. The minister has the authority to convene the chair. No corresponding authority resides in the chairperson. So it's always almost always come from the other direction. So I don't understand that.
So through the deputy minister, you said you got a response that basically, I guess, was a non-response from the minister's chief of staff. Did you get a response then from the deputy minister on why the minister wasn't planning to, or didn't end up meeting you?
No.
Sorry, you say no? Okay. So then, I guess, is this where, when the minister didn't have the briefings weren't available, obviously through this major reform that was about to happen, is that part of where I guess, to my initial question that leads you here today, that didn't help the situation in terms of getting the PMPRB together as a cohesive group, where now we're seeing mass resignations from the board?
Yes, yes, for sure. That's where things started to basically unravel. I mean, when you're meeting 13 times with the industry and 0 times with an agency within your own portfolio, I don't think good things can come from that generally. And that doesn't include the meetings that were also held between industry and Health Canada officials at the bureaucratic level. Again, we met with our counterparts at Health 7 times over the course of those consultations, and at no time were we told that there was any concern about either the substance of the guidelines or the process surrounding them.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. We're going to go now to Ms. Sidhu, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses, for being with us. My question is to Mr. Herder. In your letter, you stated that you believe that the Minister of Health undermined the board's independence. However, subsection 96 under Section 5 of the Patent Act states that the PMPRB must consult with various parties, including the Minister of Health, before the issuance of any guidelines. This requirement to consult and who must be consulted was also highlighted in the letter published on March 3, 2023, by the former acting chairperson. How can you say that the minister undermined the board independence despite the requirements of consult him in the Patent Act?
I think communicating, talking in depth about what potential issues might arise if we were to move forward with those proposed guidelines, all of that is best practice. But you have to remember is that we didn't have any of those conversations until a request to suspend, which I interpreted as a very strong suggestion, if not a demand, occurred, right? No communication directly with the minister until that point in time. And when the same request had been made by the most vocal stakeholder to that effect, to suspend, not to consider our concerns and reflect as a board and make a decision about whether to extend, to move forward, et cetera, in December, but rather to just stop the consultation altogether, given the closeness of that language, a point that was echoed, I would say, very closely in time on the same day as we got the letter from the minister. It's my understanding that we also received a similar request from Innovative Medicines Canada. Again, suspend. It's in that context that our independence was undermined.
With the budget, Jory?
Mr. Johari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the fact that I only have about 2.5 minutes, a couple of clarifying questions. Mr. Clark, number of times you mentioned that you reached out to the minister or the ministry staff asking for a briefing. And the Act requires also the PMPRB to do consultation. Can you, in your mind, give me a difference between what a request for a briefing is and what a request for consultation is?
Well, I mean, we'd had 7 meetings with Health Canada officials. I would characterize all of those as briefings. We were briefing them on the content of the guidelines and also discussing the feedback that we were getting from stakeholders. I think the proper platform or vehicle for consulting a minister is typically by officials, but also less frequently a briefing with the minister. So an opportunity to exchange information, answer questions, everything that a briefing typically would entail.
Did the board at any time consider what the minister was or the ministry was busy with and what crisis they were dealing with, specifically shortage of medicine at that time?
Oh, things were, it was a crazy time all around, for sure.
Perfect. So crazy time. A number of times you reached out to brief the minister. To me, with 35 years of consulting background, there's a huge difference between consultation and briefing. I usually consult all my stakeholder, and then I go to my executives and brief them with what I had heard. I know that you didn't get a chance to brief the minister because of the competing. But really what I'm hearing a lot, and I'd like to follow up on my colleague, Mr. MP General, how do you define the culture within the working culture, the working behavior in PMPRB? Looks like there are a lot of issues there.
Well, I mean, if you look at our public service survey results, we typically outscore the public service as a whole on over 95% of the questions in terms of everything positive, and other micro agencies on about 90% of the questions. So I think we're doing just fine in the main. There's no question that, after 3 delays and then a significant paring back of the regulations, it's had an impact on the morale of staff. But I think, staff, I'm sure, was listening to the minister's testimony last week, and he expressed multiple times his earnest desire to get pricing under control in Canada. I think that would have done an awful lot to boost morale among staff. But the impact that that's had on staff, I think, was aptly characterized in Professor Herder's letter.
Thank you, Mr. Clark and Mr. Johari. Suite, Mr. Thériault pour...
Mr. Thériault, 2.5 minutes. Mr. Clark, for every attempt to meet with the minister, did you inform the chair of your attempt? Mr. Herder, in your resignation letter, you state that the minister request was no different in form or substance from the talking points of the industry. The talking points of the industry. That goes further than suspension. When I read the letter, what I see is a federal minister of health who is questioning whether he should be concerned about the opinions of his provincial counterparts. A federal opinion on reforms leading to drug shortages and an implication that the concerns of some stakeholders were not well-founded. This would include patient groups, not just the industry. So how does this resemble industry, and how does it undermine the board's credibility?
Thank you. Again, in the context of a fall consultation period where there was no dialogue directly or briefing directly with the minister, the language of asking us to suspend is what hurt our credibility. Secondly, there were broad similarities. Of course, the wording was not exactly the same. The language of shortages could be interpreted to refer to, well, we won't launch products in this country if these pricing reforms become real. That is very much a talking point that industry has offered. The uncertainty of new guidelines, of course there's going to be a period of change. There was going to be a transitional period where we collected information, started to apply the new guidelines in practice. Of course, nobody likes change, but there were new regulations, so we needed new guidelines. That point about uncertainty was also very similar to industry's talking points.
Monsieur.
All the same, the views of provincial counterparts are important. Mr. Clark, initially, you presented reforms that were disqualified on 2 of those 3 points by the Court of Appeal. You had a chair that did have knowledge in the area. She had some concerns, fears, and she was concerned about having the board complete the reforms without ending up embroiled once again in a legal process, and what you're saying that you don't accept that internal concerns. So basically, Mr. Clark, when one disagrees with you as executive director, one doesn't belong in the PMPRB. The PMPRB is your baby. Is that what we are to understand? And is that the atmosphere that prevailed?
Well past time, but you're entitled to a response, so please go ahead.
Those were not my reforms. They were the minister's reforms. And as where the acting chair had concerns about the constitutionality of the reforms, if she did, she never expressed them when she was chair.
1.5 minutes.
Thank you. The Patent Act says before the board issues any guidelines, it shall consult with the minister. The minister last week, though, told this committee that it would have been inappropriate for him to contact the chair to initiate the consultations without an invitation from the chair. And the acting chair at the time, Madame Bourassa-Forcier, said the following: "The rule said I couldn't meet him. I was told that I was the equivalent of a deputy minister reporting to the minister and that I had to wait for the minister's invitation to meet him." Help me explain, how is this consultation this mandatory consultation called from the Patent Act supposed to occur if neither the minister nor the chair of the PMPRB can initiate the consultation? Or is there something wrong with what we were told?
Yeah, I mean, it's plain wrong, and it's completely inconsistent with past practice. Typically, the chair, like I said, it's true. The chair, from a purely pedantic standpoint, is the equivalent, is a deputy head of the organization. Deputy heads of organizations are supposed to have regular interaction with the ministers who are responsible for their portfolios. The PM's directive on open and accountable government says that very thing. So it's completely within common practice for ministers and heads of admin tribunals to have discussions about issues of overlapping concern.
Mr. Clark, if I can interrupt,
Sure.
I have very little time. Section 102 of the Act says the minister may at any time convene a meeting of the following persons. A, the chairperson and such members of the board as the chairperson may designate. Was the minister correct when he told us that it was inappropriate for him to initiate a meeting with the chair, given Section 102 of the Patent Act?
I think the minister was improperly briefed.
Okay, thank you. Now, the minister admitted to this committee on Thursday that he hasn't engaged in those consultations, that he apparently requested the suspension of the consultations with the PMPRB about the guidelines to this day. And this is over 5 months after he wrote his letter. What is your take on that?
Well, I think the first and most important point is it's not his place to consult his provincial counterparts on our guidelines. Again,
No, I meant consultations with the PMPRB.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said he. Yes, I mean, my understanding, I'm not aware of him having met at all with his counterparts in other provinces. We briefed provincial ministries on our guidelines, and I'm not aware of him having met with the board since that letter.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Next, Mr. Abulteyev for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thanks both for appearing today. Mr. Herter, Dr. Herter, you joined PRB just on making changes to policies that really going to affect positively the bottom line of getting the best buck for the dollar, or the best value for the dollar. How many policies changes you were able to achieve being there since June 2018, correct?
Effectively, we were not able to achieve any changes in that time frame. Obviously, the pandemic was a major factor in all of that. We worked quite hard to try and change guidelines as the court cases were proceeding, as we waited for the regulations to be declared into force. So we did a lot of consultation and policy development, but none of those things have translated into actual policy changes to date.
When you were hired to do the job, how many interviews do you have with the department before you get the job? Do you recall?
At least 2 interviews, also a written exam, which I was quite nervous for. You know, I teach patent law, so to be examined on it for the first time in a long time, I was worried I wouldn't do so well, but obviously I did okay.
I'm sure you probably have asked about the process, how the communication is going to be between yourself and what you do with the department. All this clear communication or roadmap was clear to you before you joined. Have you seen any difference after you joined? Were you surprised about how this communication is taking place?
What happened in the late fall was a departure from all of the communication patterns, the attempts to develop policy that had occurred during my tenure. It was a dramatic change from the past.
Would you describe that, as I said earlier, I mean, I think the intention is to get the best value for the dollar. And seems like from those multiple resignations, this is a protest over the role of the PRB toward the department and the Ministry of Health in general. Would you describe that as a protest?
My term would have ended this coming June, and I was sufficiently concerned about what had happened with the minister and pressure from stakeholders that I wasn't sure I was able to do anything further inside. I think there was division within the board, but there remain a lot of very dedicated staff who hope to follow through and improve prices in Canada for Canadians. So it was a decision I struggled with greatly. The last thing I wanted to do was call into question the work of those colleagues for whom it is a full-time job. That was only a part-time job for me.
So that negative pressure from the government must have provided a major obstacle to the job of the board. Is that correct?
Yes, as I tried to stress, I think it has made the prospect of developing new guidelines, of other kinds of decisions that the board might face in the future, it's made it very difficult in light of what's happened.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to defer the rest of my time to Mr. Kitchen.
You
Thank
have a
you.
minute and a half, Mr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to move to resume debate on the motion presented at the last meeting.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is not debatable. It's a dilatory motion to resume debate on the motion that we debated at the last meeting, so it is not debatable. We're going straight to a vote. All those in favor of resuming debate on Dr. Ellis's motion, please raise your hand. All those opposed? The motion is defeated. You still have a minute and a half, Dr. Kitchen.
Yep. Thank you. You want to go ahead? Or?
I'll defer it back to
Mr. Abulteyev for a minute
Okay.
and a half.
Well, thanks again. For the board to function its own capability in the proper way, what measures do you think it should be done or should be taken to assure that is going to happen in the future?
I think we have to make sure that the independence is actually safeguarded so that there can be lots of consultation led by the board with the minister and others and other parts of the government. We have to remain the master of our own guidelines, for instance. And certainly there can be no interference. So a recommitment to independence. And part of that is that the relationships that some members perhaps have with industry through their day jobs, we need to take much more seriously, as I said in my opening comments, conflicts of interest.
Mr. Clark, in a publicly published letter from MS Canada to this committee, it appears that stakeholders are under the impression that they are not being considered in decision-making processes in the last 6 years. Would you believe that other stakeholders and interest groups are under the same impression?
Well, I think the stakeholder group is divided between private insurers and public payers and independent patient groups and academics who support the reforms and feel like they have been heard, and then industry and industry-funded patient groups, and on the other hand, who feel like they have not been heard. But I testified, some of you know, I testified on 2 occasions in 2019 and 2020 during our last round of consultations, and we did provide a number of documents. We undertook to provide a number of documents to the committee. I have some of them here, one of which shows all the changes that we have made over the course of that previous round of consultations in light of feedback from industry, and they were significant and they were substantive. Just in that period of time alone, 2019, 2020, we spent over 110 hours meeting with industry stakeholders. So I don't agree with that point, and I believe the briefing note that Mr. Davies cited at last Thursday's testimony, the acting chair made the same point. You know, the industry would come to every meeting and read out a disclaimer that they were there against their wishes and they had no intention to engage on the substance. So where does that leave you, you know, in terms of an exchange of ideas, or I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Abulteyev. Next, Mr. Van Koeverden, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Repeatedly throughout this meeting, the number 13 with respect to pharmaceutical company consultations with the minister has been quoted to either witness. Last year, do you recall anything happening with across Canada with respect to analgesics that might have warranted some of those meetings with pharmaceutical companies? And also, are analgesics patented drugs?
I think you're referring to children's Tylenol. I think that's what the minister at least was alluding to in his letter to us, which of course isn't a patented medicine and doesn't have anything to do with products under our jurisdiction.
I didn't think it had anything to do with the PMPRB. Yeah. So it's fair to say that the suggestion that all those meetings with industry groups were to benefit Canadians and their access to non-patented drugs. Is that correct?
I wasn't privy to those meetings, so I have no idea what the subject matter was.
The timing is pretty obvious, isn't it?
Well, it overlapped with our consultations.
onto the definition of the word suspend, as it's been brought up once or twice. In English, the letter said, respectfully consider temporarily delaying. Do you think that suspending, implying temporary delaying or requesting further consultation or consideration, is undue interference or making a very direct recommendation?
I've never seen an English copy of that letter, so the only copy that I have is that says, sur la base de ces considérations, je demande.
On the basis of those considerations, I would respectfully ask the board to consider suspending the consultation process.
Translation.
Yeah, your French is better than mine, and I heard the translation as well. The word is consider temporarily suspending.
Right.
So I think it's fair to suggest that, the interpretation of that, whether it's in French or English, has been broadly interpreted. I'd like to correct the record on one thing before I move on. No attempt to brief me as parliamentary secretary from the PMPRB has ever come through my office or through any of my staff. Moving on now. Last week when we had a meeting with Melanie Bourassa Forcier, she only received about 30 minutes of an opportunity to provide testimony to this committee. And out of fairness, now that we are upwards of an hour for these two witnesses, I would move to adjourn this meeting.
A motion to adjourn is not debatable. We'll go straight to a vote. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, please raise your right hand.
Inaudible. He moved a motion to adjourn this meeting. He moved a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Shall the meeting now be adjourned? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.